Hello and welcome to Board Game Gumbo. Today we're going to be unboxing Dune from Gale Force 9. This is a game for 2 to 6 players that plays in 2 to 3 hours. It's a reprint of a much older game of the same name from Avalon Hill. In Dune, you're trying to conquer the most of the planet and have control of a certain number of territories that will allow you to win. So here we have just a quick start guide, explains just the basics of the game, but will allow you to get into the game pretty quickly. Here's the full rule book, which is much thicker. This is a fairly complicated game, partly because each faction in the game has a completely unique ability. So here are the different factions, which you'll be familiar with if you have read the books or even watched the movie. But each faction here has a very specific faction power, which I'll explain when we get to that part. Here we've got, these are just your faction sheets, so they explain how you start. Each faction starts differently with a different amount of forces and a different number of spice tokens, which are basically currency. And then it also explains your advantages, which is your special abilities. Here we've got quite a bit of punch board. These are units for each faction, so they're color coded. We've got orange and red here, which is a little bit difficult to tell, but not too bad. And then over here, we just got some faction tokens for scoring and such. And these all punch out really easily, and it's good stock. Got here spice tokens. Again, this is just currency, what you'd be using to buy the different things in the game and move units. We've got leader tokens. So leader tokens, each faction is going to have a certain number of leaders, and you can use leader tokens during combat to add whatever power they have to your combat total. Battle wheels are how combat takes place. So when you fight a combat, you're going to get one of these wheels, and you're going to set this to the amount of units you have in the area that you want to commit to the fight. So when you set this to 4, you first of all have to have at least 4 units in the area, but win or lose, you're going to lose those 4 units. So whether you win or not, you're going to lose what you use in the fight. And then down here, there's a spot where you can put your leader if you decide to use them in the fight. You have to use either a leader in a fight, or there are cards you can use in lieu of a leader, but you have to use one or the other. If you can't, you also have to announce that you can't. So another battle wheel, and then more leader tiles, more spice tiles, and these are just a couple special tiles used in the game. Here's the sandworm tile that you use occasionally, and then the board itself here. So the board is just a map of the planet with different areas that you can control and conquer. So the most basic win condition is controlling a certain number of these strongholds. So you have different areas here, like the tanks here, which is where your units go to after a fight until they're healed. The spice bank here, which is just where the extra spice will go. And then you have a round tracker up here. And these are the different phases of the game. So every round will be these different phases. So what else you got in here? Little pieces to put the battle wheels together. And then we've got several decks of cards. So first we have Treachery Cards. Treachery Cards can be bought during the course of the game and used for different reasons. Some of them are weapons, some of them are armor. You can use during fights. For instance, here you have a las gun you can use during a fight, and it explains on the card all the rules for it. Knives and things of that nature, shields, defensive items. Here are the hero cards you can use instead of using one of your leaders if you don't want to risk your leader, if you don't have one available. and just some worthless cards. So one of the rounds of the game is putting out a number of these treachery cards equal to the number of players, and then blindly bidding on them. Except somebody knows, potentially, what the cards are, because one of the special abilities of the Atreides faction is that they get to look at the treachery cards. So they know what's being auctioned off and nobody else does. And what they do with that information, whether they sell it or use it to their own advantage, is entirely up to them. So that's an explanation of one of the sort of abilities that factions get that make them pretty significantly different from the other factions. Here we have spice cards. These are just random cards that'll tell you every round there's going to be an area that will accumulate a certain number of spice. And obviously this is what people want. They want to go get the spice because that's what you use to buy your treachery cards and to move your units. And then occasionally a sandworm will come up instead. Here we have trader cards. So at the beginning of the game, each player is going to get 4 of these trader cards. Unless you are House Harkonnen, in which case I believe you get 8. No, I'm sorry. You keep all 4. So every player is going to get 4 of these, but they can only keep 1. House Harkonnen is going to get 4 and keeps all 4. House Harkonnen can also hold more treachery cards, twice as many. And these trader cards basically will correlate to one of the leaders that a faction will have. And you'll potentially also get your own faction. So you could be playing as the Emperor and get an Emperor leader. And from those cards, you're going to select either 1 or 4, depending on if you're Harkonnen or somebody else, to keep. And you can use these during battle. And when you use a trader card during a fight, if your opponent is using that hero, you can flip over the trader card and you instantly win that fight. So here is the prediction cards. This is for the Bene Gesserit faction, and this is probably my favorite special power that the factions get. So the Bene Gesserit's special power is that after setup, they get to look through this deck of cards. And there's 1 card for each faction, and then there's 1 card for each turn in the game. And the Bene Gesserits are going to decide what they think, which faction is going to win, and on what turn they're going to win. And at the end of the game, when the game ends, if they're right, they also win. Which I think is probably the coolest power here. Some of the other powers, the Fremen can move much more easily. Obviously, Dune is their home planet. So they move 2 spaces instead of 1. The Emperor has a really interesting ability. Here are just some reference cards that explain the different phases of the game to you. The Emperor has a really interesting ability, and any money that's spent on treachery cards goes to him. The Spice Guild. So here are storm cards. So there's going to be a storm, which is just going to affect certain regions of the board. And I believe this happens every round as well. Basically, there's a storm token, which we saw earlier on the chipboard here. And that storm token is going to move around the board based off of the storm card that comes up. And as you can see, it always moves left. So the Spice Guild, you have to pay spice to move your units onto the board. Essentially, you're sending them from ships in orbit. So you have to pay spice to move them to the board. And any spice you use, the Spice Guild gets a portion of that. So here's the last 2 deck of cards. So we have the Kwisatz Haderach card, which is an advanced rule when you're playing with the Atreides, but basically makes your leaders stronger and has some additional rules as well. And then alliance card, so you can create alliances during the game. And what this does is it makes it harder to win. You have to control more strongholds to win. But obviously you're combining forces. So, and also when you are allied with another faction, you get a special power, which is like a weaker version of their special ability. And that's everything that comes in Dune. If you looks interesting to you, if you like these big, long, sort of epic war games, look for this one in your local gaming store. It retails for $50. And if you've liked our video, please like and subscribe below. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. And that's it.